Actually make it a little tighter.
Okay.
You know, like the TV time. Okay.
Today joining us is a multiple Academy Award-winning director, Vietnam veteran, and my co-host, Sean Stone's father, Oliver Stone. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Stone.
Well, I hope that's the last thing is the thing that matters the most. That it will go on in history that he was my son.
He was your son, yes.
I hope he far achieves anything I did.
Well, thank you. So coming up now, we have the JFK re-release, November 6th from Warner Brothers. And that's coming out the 50th anniversary. This year is the 50th anniversary of Kennedy's assassination. Mm-hmm. And JFK is obviously one of the definitive films in a lifetime full of definitive films in your case. But JFK was a turning point, I think, for you. Let's go back a little bit to 1991, when the film first came out. And, you know, obviously going into it, I don't think you expected it would be quite as controversial and life-changing for you. But can you describe how much you expected a backlash, and then really how deep and ugly it got for you at that point when the film was released?
For me, the movie was, unfortunately for me, it was a crossover point, because from being very, very hot and wanted, I became very controversial. And I was never had witnessed this in my life. I had never seen such articles before the movie came out. They were reviewing the script, an earlier draft of the script in the Washington Post. Newsweek had a cover that said they actually enjoyed the movie, but they said, "Do not trust this movie." Basically, on the cover they had that, and New York Times very negative, because the New York Times has always been against any other kind of concept of this murder. From then on, it would always be Oliver Stone. He's making a movie. It's not so much about judging the movie as a movie, but simply judging it in reference to my supposed love of conspiracies and paranoia. I made 3 crime films, Natural Born Killers, U-Turn, and Savages. I don't think any of those 3 were ever judged in the light of just being a film about these subjects. They were always judged in the light of a previous reputation. It's haunted me because I haven't done many conspiracy films. There's a hint of it in Nixon, but it's essentially a deep bio, and the rejection of that movie by the public hurt me the most, I think. And NW was not treated as heavily as I thought it should be, but that's the way this business goes. But once you make a JFK, you're finished. You're like Costa Gavras will always be associated with Z, I suppose.
That's obviously within the power structure that is Hollywood. You're saying that you felt it. I mean, I'm sure there were a lot of people that supported you, in terms of liberal communities, more free-thinking people.
No. The white liberal community, on the contrary, if it's exemplified by the New York Times, is not free-thinking. They're very much locked into a rigid thought process. Most of their journalists have constantly, they don't even review books that are very good books by Robert Grodin, Cyril Wecht, Gary Aguilar, Ting Thompson. And now the new books, James Douglas, JFK and the Unspeakable, which I've been promoting, Brothers by David Talbot. These books are ignored. It's like the Untold History of the United States, which is also never reviewed by these mainstream publications. Seriously, they're threatened by it because we're thinking outside the box.
But I think that's part of the reason why Kennedy is to this day, so intensely, argued over, in a sense. The reason they're making shows like Parkland, right, to defend the idea of the single assassin.
I think killing Kennedy is much more dangerous because it's very successful, and they're making a TV thing out of it. This is an idiot book by O'Reilly. The poster, there you see Kennedy and you see the dramatic evil twin right behind him, and that's supposed to be, obviously that's an easy story to swallow. I love it, but I don't think you can sell that to everybody.
Well, most people don't believe it. Like you said, most Americans don't believe that Oswald acted alone. But the question is,
sure, O'Reilly has a lot of influence, so he's certainly working against it. And also, O'Reilly will convince us eventually, and all those people, that the Vietnam War was a good thing. Already that's starting to happen. Obama has commemorated the Vietnam War. There's going to be all kinds of events over the next few years. With national backing, sanction. So the memory, if you look at American television, you get this, you realize it's an idiot box, and they wash over things, and everything gets softened at the edges. So killing Kennedy.
But that's kind of the question to me is, we talk about Hollywood as being as being separate from government, right? It's supposed to be separate from government. It's supposed to be separate from, you know, the rest of the media. And the New York Times doesn't necessarily dictate what goes on in Hollywood. And yet there is this sort of media. I think you talk about in Natural Born Killers, for example, the idea of media being amorphous and being something like the wind, like the weather, that you know, that spreads. So even though there may be people, I'm saying on an individual basis, who could have agreed with you and maybe thought you were right, would have been too scared by the overall media
yeah, most
storm.
definitely. I've talked to so many writers who have always been cautious in their remarks. For example, well, somebody at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, who I see next week in St. Louis, just tell me, he wrote this thing very positive about the film. The editor lifted certain lines, such as most of the American people have not believed in the Oswald did it alone. They took that out. That goes on all the time. Roger Ebert wrote the best review of the film. He said, look, I don't know the facts. I don't know, you know, if he's right or wrong, but I do think that he caught the right atmosphere and the mood. And I feel that that's what happened, even if I don't know for sure. And I thought that was a very honest statement, you know, because I don't think anybody will go far and say, look, I embrace this wholly, because you can't. Because first of all, you should see the movie and then read. And you should read and look at these pictures. But Grodin's done the best job. He's got a new book out called Absolute Proof. It's a pretty bold title, but it stares back at you. If you look at the Zapruder film in detail, you see the material flying out the back of his head. You've had 20 witnesses at that Parkland, and you had another 8 or 10 at the autopsy in Bethesda, that botched autopsy, if there was indeed one autopsy. But you have these people saying the cerebellum is falling out his back of his skull. It was that bad. It was dripping on the floor. It was a dastardly autopsy. They took that body illegally out of Parkland quickly. And they had military men, and as we showed in the movie, they had military men in Bethesda who were controlling the don't do this, don't do that. And some people and including Cyril Weck, believe it was a fraudulent autopsy, because the photos have never matched what some of the people saw in Parkland. And of course, 50 plus witnesses on that day testified in front of the Warren Commission that the shot came from the fence. They saw some smoke and they heard the sound. And everybody started running there. I mean, it's kind of crazy. And it's also, if you ever look at Dealey Plaza in person, and you can see that's the kill shot. You can't get him from the rear, especially through a tree and he's moving away from you. You know, this is basic stuff, and people should just read about it and read the experts, not me, because I'm not a pathologist.
But again, it goes back to that question in JFK, which is why. As long as they can make you believe Oswald's the one who did it, then there's nothing in Kennedy's performance as a president that endangers the establishment. When you ask why, and you say, wait, Oswald's not the one, why was he killed, right? If there's a conspiracy, then why the conspiracy?
Well, we raised all those issues, a lot of those issues in JFK, but it was buried, and I think they said it was a single focus. They said it was Vietnam. Was he pulling out of Vietnam? It wasn't the only focus in the movie, but it was a big issue, absolutely, a huge issue. And the truth is, we were telling the truth, and we know it. And although we repeated it, they denied it. And now it's become, I think, more conventionally understood that he was definitely pulling out of Vietnam. Too many good people said he was, and he had no intention of staying and fighting. And certainly not. He only had, by the way, combat advisors, non-combat advisors in Vietnam. He also had a lot of pressure to put combat advisors in, and he always made that distinction. He saw what the French had been through. He understood the French wars in Algeria. He had a very moving trip to Vietnam in '51 that he spent several weeks there. He knew the score that way.
So you're saying that Kennedy's policies are some of the main factors behind what led to his assassination?
Kennedy, as a young man, inherited from two presidents a war machine of incredible proportions. More importantly, and this has been actually admitted to by the establishment historians, Kennedy faced generals who were prepared for a first strike on the Soviet Union, because we had the ability to do it, and their argument makes sense in the military world. If we hit them now, we're going to win. There's no retaliation. They can't hurt us that much. We can sustain these casualties. We had such superiority, and they said if the Soviets build up now, which they probably will, they'll have parity in 5, 10 years, and they did. After the Cuban Missile Crisis, they did build up. But not ever to the extent that Reagan made that out to be, because Reagan was also crying wolf, as we always do. We cry wolf all the time. We're always threatened, but that's part of the mentality. But what I'm saying is that Kennedy had enormous character and courage to say no to the Bay of Pigs, to Laos, to the invasion of Laos, which was suggested by the Pentagon, and then Vietnam, and then Cuba, which is a big one, which was the invasion of '62. We were planning it. And that's what the Soviets reacted to. They put what they considered defensive missiles into Cuba. Essentially, it was Kennedy and Khrushchev, when they combined and actually stared down the generals, they both had the same problem. Khrushchev, the hardliners in the Soviet Union, said that he shit his pants. And they got rid of him within a year, if you follow the story. This guy, Robert Dallek, who's an establishment historian, he just got a book out about, and a lot of it is about the fight with the Pentagon, much less the fight with the CIA, because he fired the CIA chiefs. He made a lot of enemies by the time he was shot in Dallas, and from that pool of enemies, you can easily draw some conclusions, and I don't do that. I just basically lay out the difference between Eisenhower and Kennedy, and the difference between Kennedy and Johnson, because he is an interregnum of 3 years. It's a very crucial period in our life, in the history of this country. It could have gone towards a détente, a real détente, like Reagan finally achieved Gorbachev, but we didn't. We didn't, because too much money is at stake. But when you become president, you get pressure. You get military pressure. You're always under threat. Your life is under threat. Your country's under threat, like Obama did. I imagine you have to live in a world where every morning the national security guy comes in and he tells you you're in the shitter, or somebody's coming after. I think you live in a world where you have to become a hardliner in a certain way. Even Kennedy, he obviously hated, he had a problem with liberals too. I mean, he fired a few of them. But he always respected the right wing more, because we always tend to respect the loudest guy in the room. If Curtis LeMay's in the room, you got to listen to the guy, although he might be completely nuts, because he's got power in his character. And as I said in the movie, in the Untold History, the thing about American politics is that you cannot be soft. You have to be strong. That is a devastating aspect of power. Whereas in other countries, I think they understand that leaders can moderate. And not in this country. Lyndon Johnson, what ruined his administration was his belief that he would be seen as weak in Vietnam. And he was willing to destroy his Great Society concept in the idea that he could not be perceived as weak. American credibility has been talked about over and over again, to death. Domino theory, Eisenhower, Japan is going to fall. What happened? Vietnam fell and Japan didn't fall. Thailand didn't fall. Nothing fell.
When I was growing up, my father, I think I was probably 11 or 12 when my father took me to see JFK, and had a profound impact on a young man. Especially in terms of when I went back to history class in school, and then started kind of asking the questions that were raised in that when we got to American history, and the teacher kind of stares back at me blankly, and to me that was a profound moment of just realizing, even at a young age, that not everything in school, there's elements of history that are outside of what is taught in schools. And now recently seeing, Untold History of the United States, which, I sat and watched, all 12 episodes. It's fascinating. I was blown away. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about that is when you were doing the research into the Untold History, was there anything that you discovered that you didn't know that really changed your view on U.S. history?
I'm not a historian. I love history and I read it all my life, but I approached this documentary as a dramatist. I combined my talents with Peter Kuznick, who is a historian. He's been teaching American history for 30 years for American University. He's a director of nuclear studies, Nuclear Policy Institute there. He knows a lot about the bombs, the scientists of the 30s, written about it. And he teaches a class in my films, okay, at American University. But in 1995, he told me the story of the atomic bomb, the way he saw it. And it was fascinating. Henry Wallace dumping him, and Harry Truman and the bomb. But I never really connected all the dots. I've been doing progressive films since the 1980s, since the Reagan era, when I got into Salvador and the Vietnam films and Wall Street. I tried to be more progressive, but I wasn't putting it all together. By 2008, when Bush had been in office for 2 terms, I was very depressed, and it was a nightmare to my point of view. And I just felt we had to go back, and I had to go back to understand my life, what happened to the country that I loved. And to put this all together, why are we so warlike? Why are we so militant and aggressive? And it's an empire, but it's an empire truly that's not known to the public. It's not clear to them. And we thought I could do more with my life and my children, for my children too, to show them what I had seen from the 1940s on to 2008. So we worked on it for 5 years. I learned an enormous amount during that period because Kuznick and his graduate students were doing a tremendous amount of research and putting it all together. But I had the additional problem as a dramatist of how do I take it became a 785-page book, but how to take this and put it into a 12-hour series where you have 58 minutes and 30 seconds for each episode. It's basically a decade almost, and from 1900 to 2013 was a tremendous challenge to simplify, because the book to me is a primer. It's hard to read. I mean, except as a student, it's a primer. But the series is like a movie, and it was done like a movie where we don't stop. We fly at you. I wanted to make it as exciting as a JFK montage. So that was always the driving ethos for me, as well as fact-checking, because you don't do what you can do in a movie, in a documentary. You have to check everything. We did it 3 times. We had Showtime fact-check, we had a CBS Legal fact-check, and we had our own fact-check. So we had serious issues that had to always be corrected. This took time, because there's a lot of mythology in history. You know, those quotes that you think happened, they never happened. And you have to go down and check everything and get 2 sources.
You know, I think that in watching, you know, you because I was working for a year editing Untold History, and watching your evolution of understanding the nature of the British role in shaping the American empire, that's a critical thing, that, you know, America inherits this imperial politics through the 20th century. This is not 19th century America. This is 20th century America. It's a very different country.
People don't understand the British Empire and how strong it was. It ruled the world, and it was the cause of World War I, basically. I mean, they're Germans, and we're trying to compete with the English. But the English Empire lasted past World War I. Although they took enormous casualties, they made others do their fighting. They had Indians, and when Singapore fell, it's very interesting, the Indian troops, I think more than 50% went over to the Japanese because they wanted to be liberated from the British. As you know, India had very mixed feelings about the war, and right afterward declared independence, or fought for its independence.
And even the policy of being anti-Russian was really a British policy. I mean, go back to the 19th century, the Crimean War. Russia was always the great enemy of the British because they wanted to control the heartland of Eurasia, right? And so Russia was a tremendous...
And Lloyd George got Woodrow Wilson to send troops into Russia after the revolution to help. The counter-revolution was fought by 16 countries against Russia. Russia was born in distrust of the West. And the key moment is not just Churchill's speech in 46, March 46. I think the key moment to me, everyone can read it differently, is the day that Britain hands over the Greek problem to the U.S. in early 47. That winter of 46, 47 was a really rough winter for Britain. They were going huge changes. Their economy was devastated. They just couldn't fight this war in Greece anymore against the communists. So and I wouldn't say they were communists. I really think they were Greek nationalists. That's why, who had fought against fascism, and they were declared communists. Okay, but what's interesting is that we study this and we know it, but we deny it. Stalin did not help the Greek communists. After 46, there was no help, and that's what caused a split with Tito, because Tito had fought right next to the Greek communists for so many years. He loved them. I mean, they all fought against the Nazis, and Tito could not break off his aid to the Greek communists. Stalin did, and they never really got on after that. That was where that first split in the communist world that shows you it's not monolithic, which I grew up believing, because everybody would tell me in school, my father, they're all together. The Chinese, the Yugoslavians, they're a totalitarian system. They're in our schools. McCarthy was talking about, they're in our schools, they're in our government, they're here. All these TV shows, I led 3 lives. There were communists everywhere. Your teacher could be a communist. You imagine growing up like that.
Well, the scary thing is that we have it now. I mean,
yeah.
the idea of terrorists, Muslims are now this universal empire, in the same way of speaking that Americans don't get. I mean, if you say Muslim, they go, oh, they're all the same.
Well, I don't think it's Muslim as much as terrorist. You see, the concept of terrorist to me is a very loose definition. Hitler had these anti-terrorist laws in Germany. Ultimately, the Jews were part of that, were terrorists in a way. Economic terrorists, whatever they called them, I forgot the details, but they had terror. Every country, every dictatorship builds up on terror laws, and that's what we have in this country. And we've lost our minds. After 2001, we lost our minds. That's why I hate Bush so much. But there's no stopping it, because right now, I mean, if it's Boston tomorrow and there's a bombing here or the bombing there, That's the nature of life. You're going to have terrorism the rest of your life. It's never going to get away. I remember in Europe there was terrorist attacks that were frightening in the 70s and 80s. I was there. In France, in England, in Spain, in Japan, in Italy, huge terrorist attacks. Terrifying. People adapted to it, and they went after these people with police work, detective work, good security. You need security, and caught them all. They were all caught. Same thing would have happened with Bin Laden with a decent core. What we had was in place. Well, and by the way, our intelligence was good enough to warn Bush, but he didn't do it. So instead, he built up this huge monstrosity called the homeland.
You know, history is kind of written by the victor, obviously. And after studying all the, you know, doing all this research in the Untold History and things like in JFK and all of that, you know, looking at today's kind of dynamic of how news and communication and the technologies kind of, you know, become so much better, and I guess I would say a little bit harder to control. Do you feel that going forward for future generations, it's going to be a lot easier for the non-victors to get the real story of history out rather than let's say the oppressors or the winners, so to speak?
I don't know that. I don't know that. That's why I'm a dramatist. I'm sticking around to see what will happen. I think that's what gives it the tension of not knowing is what keeps us going. You know, if we knew for sure that this empire was going to smother everything, that all your dissenting media would be lost and not add up to anything, you'd probably give up. I think we all would. But something keeps us going. I think Snowden, he believed that if he did this the right way, he could really make a dent, and it seems that he has. He's certainly told our allies that we're not so friendly as they think, and I'm hoping that there is a chain effect. It's like a tsunami; it builds over time. But the power to smother the truth is enormous, and I have no illusions about that. I've had many disappointments in my life. A.J. Muste, who was a great pacifist, said after World War II, he said, the problem with winning is that you think you're right, and violence works. So the hard part is to get rid of the mentality. We used the bomb without thinking, and the people backed it from what they knew, the atomic bombs. Once you use those atomic bombs, you run the world. You know, you're the big shot. And what you believe, though, that you're right, you see, because it worked. And that's the big problem. So out of that comes this false morality that we carry around, this smugness, this arrogance, that because we're America, we're the exceptional, because we have the right to do this. Obama talks like he's been converted recently. He talks messianically about, well, we never do it for oil, or we never do it for resources. We do it because we sacrifice. We believe in good and right and freedom and democracy. It's Kool-Aid, but you know, we buy it, and that's what makes us very dangerous. So that if a China or something new comes along, or Russia is still there, or Iran or Venezuela, we always react badly, and we put them on the shit list. You're either with us or you're against us. And there's no reason for that to exist, that list. So I see this world as a much more precarious situation where no empire has lasted, none. We know that historically. But we have as good a shot as any because we have the most amount of military might ever assembled. We have full spectrum dominance. We control cyber war. We control space. I think we're going to be able to fire drones from space and wipe out anything. We can cut our armies down. That's not necessary. We can cut our ships down. We'll still have control because we have the information war. And I think we have lily pad bases everywhere in the world. We're jumping off spots. We've surrounded China. We have alliances now with Vietnam. We've surrounded China, and Japan and Korea have been highly militarized by a huge amount of bases. Germany's still in the ballgame. Italy has now become a major base. Africa, AFRICOM has come into being. That didn't exist a few years ago. And we're all over Africa with lily pads. And we've surrounded Russia with NATO, which is unbelievable because that was never the deal. I mean, NATO was a defensive alliance in the Cold War, but it's become an offensive. And frankly, I think we have achieved first strike abilities again, and I think that's back on the table. In other words, some lunatic could come along after Obama, sooner or later, and take that first strike option. We could wipe out the Soviet Union and China. militarily and take the retaliation, because now we've built up some of them work, anti-ballistic missiles that we have surrounding Russia and surrounding China. So it's a serious ball game, you know, but the world is, you see, that's where the tension lies. You see what's going to happen. I don't believe in predictability. I think that it always never happens the way you think it's going to happen. We talk about, history has shown us that the curve of the ball can break differently. I was a young man at your age when the Soviet Union, I went there in the 1980s, early 80s, to write a movie about the dissidents over there. It was a horrible place. The whole thing was falling apart, corrupt economy. There was no complete stagnation, no compassion in the society, and no incentive to do anything. It was falling apart. It didn't fall apart because Reagan came into office. It fell apart because a young man named Mikhail Gorbachev came up through that system. Like Henry Wallace, he was a Secretary of Agriculture, basically, for the Soviet Union. And he figured out, as Secretary of Agriculture, this country doesn't make any sense. And he saw all the pieces, and he saw how we fix this. That's what he was trying to do, reform. And he did. He started the process, which allowed the liberation of ideas and thoughts, and then one thing followed. So the Soviet Union imploded, but it also freed itself. And Reagan took the credit. But it was going to implode anyway. I have a feeling that our society is the same thing that what I saw in the 1980s in Russia, that we are the dissidents. We're not in psychiatric hospitals, true, but we might be. But the point is that we don't have power, and we are completely isolated in our society. We do have the same problems. The unemployment, the huge gap between rich and poor, the corporate intelligentsia, the group that controls the country, and the real people who have nothing to do with the country, don't give a shit about it. They have to work in the military to make a living, to get a job. You know, it's a very rough world, very rough. So I do think those tensions can implode on us, and it could be an economic tsunami, or it could be a shutdown in the government. A bunch of moron Republicans do what they do. Maybe it's a good thing that the government shuts down, because how the hell can we pay everybody after a certain point? You know, but we continue to pay the military no matter where they are.
Well, it's fascinating that, like, immediately after the government was kind of brought back from shutdown, one of the first things we did was we sent a bunch of aid over to Pakistan. You know, immediately after. And then that comes right in conjunction with Amnesty International releasing, you know, the new information on the drone strikes that didn't kill any terrorists over there or anything like that. So, you know, I think if the average person takes the time to study history, to really look at how the way politics works and moves, you know, they'll get a much better understanding of the world around them today. And I think that's the important thing when you see, you know, shows like that you've made, the Untold History and JFK and things like that.
And never be smug, because when you think it's going to stay, like we always thought the Soviet Union was going to stay. Here I am watching the Berlin Wall come down. It was one of the greatest periods of my life. I felt such liberation. It was just like, it was good for the whole world. What's good for a country is sometimes can help everyone else, like the Egyptian, the Arabic Spring. A lot of people felt good. These things happen, and you never see them coming. Nobody saw 2001 coming. I never thought that Bush would fix it, would steal the election in 2000. That really screwed us up big time. So you never see, you know, but that's why you stick around, because I think it's interesting to see the result.
What advice or wisdom would you pass to a young artist who, you know, feels compelled to create stories or work that is deemed, you know, politically or socially out of bounds or controversial, that is kind of fighting back against the system through their works? Like, what would you offer them as advice?
Well, I think the best revenge is to make it a good story and to really tell it well with tension and entertaining. Like, I think JFK was a very dry subject if you read all those books, except in the Garrison story there was a great hunt, and I think we made it into a hunt, and we made it what happens next idea, which is classic Hitchcock. So the DNA of drama is the way, and you can take outrageous subjects. Don't go. And you can go down the middle with it, like I guess Fifth Estate went down the middle. I haven't seen it, but it seems to be of limited interest. But I think if you can make the film exciting, it changes the equation. People like it. So, yeah, could you make a film that's completely about a communist hero? I don't know. It's a challenge. But I do believe your weapon is your storytelling ability, and that's where, if you can write it or direct it or produce it in a way that it can have impact. It can be small too, you know. You can do a small film about an ordinary person on a daily basis trying to make it in the United States today.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, man. It was a fascinating interview, and thank you.
Thank you. And the DVD's coming, so the Untold History is now out on DVD, the Untold History on Blu-ray, and
for download, it's everywhere. Costco, Target, Walmart, and Amazon. It's doing very well.
I can't stress enough how important it is for people to see this, because again, you know, when I was growing up, you're only getting told one side of history in high school or in your history class, and you need to have a fuller understanding of all of history in order to better know your future. And
it should be required in every classroom, I think.
We're not saying that all U.S. history you learn in school is wrong. We're just saying part of it is just you're getting part of it. You have to fill it in.
You're getting a lot of the legend rather than the facts.
Create the legend.
Plus, with it's got 3 hours, three hours of additional interview.
We have 2 hours unaired chapters, which are about from 1900 to 1940, which is amazing. And then we have an hour-and-a-half interview with Tariq Ali that Sean was involved in editing. And Tariq Ali is a very wise man, and we have different footage in there for his story.
So that's worth checking out, that DVD for Christmas time. And
JFK on November 6th.
JFK, the re-release on screens. If you haven't seen it on screen, it's an amazing experience. I think.
It's fantastic.
Give the Blu-ray to your father.
I will. He will love it.
Give the Blu-ray to your friends for Christmas. And also watch it with your girlfriend. Watch 2 or 3 hours at the same time with your boyfriend, because it really has that. It's great when a couple can see it together. It's just something to share. I don't know why.
No, it is. It's when you see people look at something and then suddenly that look in their eye, like, oh my God, I never knew that, right. And then it changes their entire world, and it's exciting to see it. You know, especially when you know the parts coming up, where you're like, oh, I can't wait to watch. You know how they react to this.
Yeah, exactly. I would love to be at Christmas time and show it to some of the conservative fathers. Tabitha, you should show it to your father.